My name is Remington Nevin, and I hope you've enjoyed your dinner this evening, as I'm going to be speaking to you about worms. These are the eggs of Ascaris lumbricoides. They can be found in the soil and in the fecal veneer that covers much of the developing world. They're the eggs of roundworms, intestinal worms. These infect 1 billion people worldwide. 100 million children under the age of 5 have these worms in their bellies right now. In these countries, infected children have what little nutrition and micronutrients they receive robbed from them. As a result, their growth is stunted, their intellectual development is impaired, school attendance suffers, and adults burdened by a belly full of worms are less productive, leading ultimately to the lack of means to escape the conditions of poor hygiene that led to infection in the first place. Infection triggers a vicious cycle where poverty begets poor hygiene, which begets poverty, a cycle that is passed down throughout the generations. And all of this is for want of an effective medication that can be administered safely every few months to keep children and adults worm-free. A medication that costs just pennies a dose. And while we spend billions, and rightfully so, on killer diseases like malaria, HIV, and tuberculosis, easily treated diseases like roundworms are neglected. And in fact, we call them the neglected tropical diseases, or NTDs. Now, NTDs have been receiving more and more attention. U.S. aid has a plan, but the program has only been funded for $89 million this year, and as a result, the rollout is slow and incomplete. And meanwhile, conflict-affected areas of the world, such as the Horn of Africa and Afghanistan, go without desperately needed treatment. And yet, for what it costs us as a nation to keep a single soldier in Afghanistan for 1 year, $1 million, we could buy enough medicine to deworm every single child in Afghanistan under the age of 5. In fact, for what we spend on just a few days of war, we could probably eradicate this condition altogether. And is this right? Our nation is engaged in a seemingly endless struggle in poverty-stricken conflict zones around the world, and yet the diseases that so directly contribute to the conditions of poverty and ill health at the root of so much conflict go unaddressed. Now, it's said that our military cannot kill its way out of these conflict zones, but as a former Army doctor, I might respectfully disagree. Imagine if instead of the global war on terrorism, we could fight the global war on worms. Now, it just so happens our military is already present in many areas of the world where worms are endemic. In these areas, we engage in what are called civil military operations in order to counter the threat of violent extremism. And since the Vietnam War, we've been using medicine in an attempt to win the hearts and minds of the local populations. Now, when I was sent to the Horn of Africa as an Army doctor, I was committed to steering clear of these ineffective clinic-for-a-day activities. Instead, I wanted to work from a public health perspective to target the endemic NTDs. But before I could do that, I had to get the permission of the general. And this was no easy task. His job was to fight terrorism, not to fight worms. And so I put up this map and I said, but sir, look at where the worms are. Somalia, Yemen, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Coincidence? And that was good enough. He was convinced. Now, every good military operation begins with good intelligence gathering. Unlike some other conflicts, I wanted to make sure what we were looking for was there. And so I set out to look for the worms and the eggs. And sometimes they were right in the open, like in this open defecation field. But at other times, I needed to go hunting for them. Well, our intelligence gathering confirmed that worms were endemic throughout the region. Entire populations required treatment. So we devised a strategy to treat tens of thousands of people at a time. We were going to deploy WMDs, or weapons of mass deworming. Now, as sophisticated as this sounds, it's really not that complicated. You take some trucks like this that you buy, and you load them with dewormers, and you convoy them together, and you set out across the region to where the local populations are. When you get there, you take the dewormer out, and you put it out on tables, and you invite the local population to line up and come get their dewormer. And within hours, the worms are being killed in droves. People are being cured of their infections. And because we're the U.S. military, we can operate in areas of low-level conflict, difficult to access areas, remote areas where no one else can go. And so we've shown that the power, and more importantly the budget, of the U.S. military can be used to kill one of humanity's common enemies, worms. But let's make this clear. The U.S. military is not responsible for this problem. To cure NTDs requires stronger investments in these civilian programs, a ramping up of host nation capability. And these military activities should never compete with or be confused for the good work of NGOs and humanitarian organizations. But in difficult to access remote areas that have known nothing but conflict, we have shown that the military can fight a new kind of operation that brings death and destruction to worms and leaves smiling, happy kids with hope for a brighter future. Thank you very much, everyone.